Hey, what's going on, everybody? Episode 9 today of the GMI Rocket Show. My name is Roman Zelichenko. I'm your host, immigration lawyer. I'm the CEO of Laborless, an immigration tech startup, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a community for immigration and global mobility attorneys, business people, anyone who wants to connect with one another about marketing and branding and all the fun stuff related to business growth. I'm super excited today. Our 9th episode, which means it's been over 2 months of doing this, crazy. I have Ronald Huiskamp, who is the CEO and founder of Relocation Online. It's a kind of a global mobility tech platform that helps individuals relocate, and it manages everything from immigration to finding a destination, looking around cities and neighborhoods, helping with finding a home, so literally renting a home, and sort of more of the large-scale relocation lifecycle. Really excited to chat today, excited to talk about the broader aspects of how immigration and immigration tech really fits into the broader sort of life cycle of the movement of people, which is, you could call it global mobility or relocation or something else. So thanks so much for joining, Ronald. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Likewise, good to be on the show. In fact, it might be the first time that I'm on a show, particularly one with a rocket in it. So good to be here.
That's great. Hopefully the rocket means that everyone on the show is going to experience massive growth afterwards. So.
Exactly. Ready for liftoff.
Yeah, definitely. To me, this is really cool because I've had a lot of guests on already who are in the immigration specifically space. It's been on the US side. It's also been on the foreign, on the Canadian side. We had a Canadian immigration lawyer and tech founder, but nevertheless, it's always sort of the blinders are on with respect to immigration. And for me as well, as an immigration lawyer, that's all I thought about, right? Once you got the visa approved for somebody, they're in the country, great. And then you move on to the next case. As I've gotten more into, deeper into the industry, I've wrapped my head around this concept of global mobility and relocation. And of course, right? What happens when the person gets their visa? There's this whole thing that they have to actually move. They have to find a home. They have to, all that stuff. So I'm excited to talk to you because you've built a platform that essentially automates or at least digitizes a lot of that, right? More than just the immigration piece. And I'm just really excited to learn about your thoughts on that. So before we jump in, I think it's always really fun to learn about people's backgrounds and sort of where they came from, what makes them tick, and sort of how they came to where they are today. You're from the Netherlands. You grew up there, I suppose, and you studied and went to university there. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Maybe what was it like growing up there, and sort of when you went to college, you went to study economics. When you went to university, did you know that you wanted to be in business, or how did all of that happen?
Yeah, good questions. Yeah, so I think my upbringing actually ended up being incredibly relevant ultimately to running your own business and particularly the work that we're doing to take complex processes and experiences and try to simplify them. And the reason I'm relating that back to the Netherlands is tiny country, 17 million people, 40% of the country is basically below sea level. So not only do we live on top of each other, we always have the risk that we actually drown together. So the Dutch has figured out early on to be collaborative, work together, and be very efficient with the limited resources that you have. And nothing could be more relevant when you are a startup founder because you're always resource constrained. And you mentioned your 9th episode. We're actually going to be in year 9 at the end of this year for our startup. And I'm still calling it a startup because, we and this is not limited to smaller companies. Bigger companies, of course, have their own resource constraints, but we very, very much still operate with that mentality. And I think it fits with where I came from. Economics is a whole other ball of wax. I think university is particularly, I'm not sure if it's much different in the US than it is in the Netherlands, but I found university and particularly economics very academic, super helpful to train this, gray mass and to learn how to reason and solve problems. But I will say it was conflicting for me because I always had more of an entrepreneurial spirit. Probably my earliest entrepreneurial endeavor was sharpening ice skates outside in the backyard of the house where I grew up, where we were on a little canal that connected to the town, where people then, when in the winter, the water would freeze up, and they would, put their skates on their shoes, literally, because that's, I'm old, but yeah, they had the skates on the shoes, and of course later more modern skates. But they would come by the house, and I would set up my little stand, and I would be sharpening their ice skates,
Wow.
making a little bit of money. So yeah, economics, again, good training to learn and solve problems, but ultimately that entrepreneurial drive was always there. So it's not surprising that I ended up running my own business.
I'm curious because, I have some memories of, shoveling snow when I was a kid. And I think it's something that maybe everyone, but I didn't want to. Like, I didn't wake up and say, there's snow, let's go shovel it, make a couple of dollars. I feel like I was sort of forced to do it or something. I don't remember exactly. I'm curious, when you were sharpening these skates, do you remember at least wanting to do that? Was this your idea, or was it someone in your family saying, hey, why don't you do this to make a couple of extra, dollars? Or
yeah, the way it came about is we had the skates ourselves, and they needed to be sharpened, and you could go to the store and you had to pay for it. Well, first problem was you never pre-planned that, right? It got cold a few days, you could go on the ice, and my younger brother and I, we were always the first one on the ice because we lived at it, so we could test it, and we were lighter too, so we could figure this out. But so then, having had that experience, like, oh, now my skates aren't sharp, we said, all right, we'll need to get one of those tools. So my dad bought that, of course, and so he got the sharpening machine so you could do it yourself. And that just led to me then being out there, always actually enjoying interacting with people as well, and then set up a little cardboard sign and $5, and here we go.
Wow, I love that. That's so cool. It's like one of those things where different people have different opinions about entrepreneurship, and whether it's learned or it's innate or some combination of the two. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, but I feel that when I hear about folks like that who, like, as a kid, you were just like, where can I make some business? Really, it's where you can help people. But nevertheless, the idea that you can make it into a business is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, we all have an innate drive to do something, right? Whether it's a passion for music or art or indeed business or your own business. I think the drive has to be there. A lot of this stuff can be learned, however. I'm still learning daily, right. So that never ends. But I do think it helps if if you've had that experience from a younger age already, then obviously you can carry that through to your adult life and professional career.
So after you graduated university, you studied economics. You got a job. You were still in the Netherlands. You got a job sort of on the technical side, if I understood correctly. And then you worked in that job, and then afterwards you actually launched your first business, it sounds like, kind of,
Yeah.
So yeah, can you talk a little bit about how that happened?
Yeah, it wasn't actually the most sexy startup because it ended up being a consulting business. But what had happened, I had worked in an industry for general contractors for HVAC equipment, so heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and they would install equipment in hotels and conference facilities and offices, etc. And I helped one of those companies early on with their first digital transformation, which, by the way, was still very analog compared to what we do today. And that meant that we had to procure software for it. It was sort of the early enterprise software that was available on the market, specific for that industry. You had to, install it, had to train everybody on how to use it, figure out how to take manual processes or that were done in other software and convert it to the new one. That was an excellent training ground for what I ultimately ended up doing later on, because you have to understand all these processes, break it down in simple pieces, and then actually going back to the software developers to translate the business use case to something that they understand, because there's a huge disconnect typically between the two. The developers will sit there and nod their heads oftentimes that they get it, particularly when you're dealing with consulting firms. But it takes a while to learn an industry, to understand the intricacies, and you need somebody who can make that translation, who speaks basically both languages, if you will. So having done that as a project, I then started a consulting firm to do that more broadly, and did that for several years. And it was great because it got me inside all kinds of companies of different sizes, and again, just continue the experience of learning, these different processes from, the receptionist and inventory clerk all the way to management who needed access to, dashboards and management information systems.
So it was kind of like you became sort of the product manager, I guess. You knew the business and the product. You also could speak the technical language. You were the bridge between the two. And then what you did was, so then you took those skills out of the company and just created your own company, essentially doing something very similar.
Yep. Yeah. So I started actually representing some of these ERPs and did these projects on their behalf. And it was indeed a combination of sort of managing the implementation and indeed being part of the product development side as well, because now I would be sitting with those people in their offices and you get the feedback, and then you need to go back to the development team to say, all right, here's what's wrong with how we envisioned this, and let's make it better.
So at this point, you're kind of, how old are you at this point when you're running your own company?
I started that probably when I was 24, 25.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I wish I was starting my own company when I was still in law school, just figuring it out. So, at this point, you're running your own company, and then you do end up moving from the Netherlands over to the U.S. Yep. Can you share a little bit about that journey? Because, now you're in the relocation industry. It's not that necessarily you moved for a job in relocation or immigration or anything like that, but surely that experience affected what you ended up doing and what you do today, from the perspective of, well, you've lived it. But, why did you, however much you can share, why did you end up moving to the US, and did you move to Seattle right away, which is where you are now, or did you kind of move somewhere else first?
No, it ended up being Seattle. It was supposed to be a couple of years. We'll see what happens next. And then life happens. And so now it's been 23 years. I was actually 27 when I moved. Life in America had always had an appeal from when I was in my teens. So when I met my then girlfriend, now wife, Alice, this was a conversation that we literally had on our first date, trying life in America. She had lived all over the world. She's actually a better expat than I am in terms of her experience and exposure. But it was an early part of our conversation. And so we spent some years together in Amsterdam, got married, and then moved. So I met her earlier. I was 21 when I met her, and when I was 27, we moved to Seattle. Seattle was a result of having visited a family member. Her uncle worked as a captain for the Holland America Line, who had an office here in Seattle, and we visited, fell in love with the place, and said, all right, we'll make it Seattle and start there.
It's amazing. Did you feel any similarities between Seattle and another, Amsterdam or somewhere else in the Netherlands?
There's obviously a difference between America and the Netherlands, right? In many respects. Although I will occasionally say something like, Seattle or Washington is the Netherlands with mountains, because there are some similarities. I mean, for us, the transition was easy. I think the attitudes here, the sort of the down to earth, focused on just, work hard, do well, that sort of resides very much here in the Northwest, and that appealed to us, I guess, in a way, and made it easier. I think it would have been different in other parts of the country. Yeah,
probably. I mean, America's so vast, you just have different cultures almost around the country, right?
Yep.
So you come to Seattle. I mean, I've been there once. I have a good friend who lives there. Really beautiful, wonderful city. You're close to the mountains. You're by the water. It's a big tech hub. Even bigger. Every day it gets bigger and bigger. Your first job, if I understand correctly, is basically with a company that deals with mobility and relocation. But you mentioned that you came in here. You had some family or your wife's family ties. How did you end up landing that job? Can you talk a little bit about sort of how did you get that job here? You moved to Seattle. How did you get it?
Well, that journey was actually an interesting one, and would take another episode. So we'll cut through the abbreviated version. But essentially, like many of us who end up working in relocation, it was purely by accident. This was a couple of years after we actually had moved here, and it ended up being Grable, who at the time, by the way, wasn't in relocation. They were strictly a moving company. But I was involved in the local sort of international community with chambers of commerce. In fact, I was I was chairing the board of the Dutch American Chamber of Commerce, and there was the French equivalent and the British equivalent, and some of them bigger and more active than others. But we also came together as a group and hosted an event that involved the then Governor Gary Locke of Washington State. We had invited the EU Trade Commission. So it was a big event held in the Washington State Convention Center. And I was one of the two organizers of that event. So one of the Grable representatives was actually at that event. We made a connection, and the next week he invited me to come to the company and have a discussion about working for them. Timing was perfect because of where we were with our immigration procedure and some other things that we had been working on. And it sounded like a great fit. He said, look, you got an international background. We need that because we want to enhance our international, house of goods moving sales activities here. So I basically became an account manager for them.
That's amazing. And you mentioned at the time they weren't yet in relocation. What did you do there exactly? And sort of how did you move on to your next role? Because your role, and the reason I wanted to kind of go by role, at least at a high level, is because, at least for me, it looks like all of those things ended up culminating into you creating something that is both, a technology platform, but also a solution that understands the back end process. It understands the operational process behind moving and relocating. So in Grable, you were working on it's like a business development or like growing the business type of role?
Yeah, it was pure business development, and similar to what you actually observed early on in our conversation about sort of this tunnel vision. I thought, well, moving, that's it, right? That's all there is to it. At least for what I obviously did at Grable. And then I had the opportunity to bid on some business, and they said, well, we like you, we think Grable is a good company. However, we need everything. We need relocation as well. And so at that time, I sort of reached out to some of my mentors inside the company and said, look, how are we going to solve this? Because we either hand it over to somebody else or we try to win the business. And early on, there was some sort of, actually within Grable, there was a sort of a startup that was working on this for relocation services. And we took that concept and made the pitch, and we actually won the business. So that then exposed me to relocation in general. And also opened my eyes to that there was more. One thing sort of led to another. I ended up then doing work for a company called Full Circle, which was a destination service provider in the United States, who ultimately was acquired by a company called Wellworks, which is one of the leading DSPs in the world. And so from the start at Grable, indeed, this journey started. And to your point, it kind of all started falling together. And the one thing that has always stayed with me, of course, was my background in technology. And then particularly in the role in destination services, the challenge always was, how do we improve what we're doing? How do we become more efficient as an organization? How do we better communicate with the transferee that we're supporting? And the available software on the market was very limited. In fact, I would say that's still the case today. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the industry isn't big, right? We don't have millions of users. We don't even have hundreds of thousands of users. So a lot of the focus of the tech was on the back office, very engineering, design principles, references still today, which your industry does as well, to cases, or in the relocation example, we refer to them as files. Well, those are people that are moving with their families. We should think about how we speak to them, but that's how the systems were designed, because they were rooted in the file management principles of the 80s and 90s when this industry came about. And so there was always sort of an attempt on my part, at least within these companies that I worked for, to find a better solution. Ultimately gave up looking for one and decided, all right, let's build one. And that's how Relocation Online got started.
Yeah, I love that, because, it's one of those things where just watching that trajectory, you think every step of the way, your horizons got broader and broader. Your eyes opened up to more and more of this industry, until you realize that, number one, there's a connection between all of them. And number two, that connection is either non-existent in terms of a tool or a solution, or it's really broken and sort of disjointed. And what if you can make that connection really streamlined? And I think this is something that people can draw in any industry, right? Whether or not it's in immigration and relocation, or it's in medical, or really anything else. Once you are in an industry, I think for long enough, you really get an understanding of who all the players are and how they all interconnect. It's really fun to think about what solutions can we create for these players.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, this might sound slightly self-serving, but I also think that's how the best sort of tech innovation happens, is by folks who have been in the industry, that understand the ins and outs and are willing and daring enough to sort of step out of what they have been doing and just start something and build something.
Definitely.
There's been, I think this year has changed everything in terms of how we view the world, and I think some of us who had already been sort of jaded a little bit, perhaps with the emphasis on tech and the word disruption, which is way overused, and oftentimes the disruptors come into a new industry and rightfully recognize that there are ways to improve things, but they often lack that intimate knowledge that is sometimes needed to do it the right way. Now, they often have a lot of money to spend and try to figure this out, which we certainly don't. But I still believe that the from the ground up build within the industry stands a better chance often than the external stuff, particularly when you get into the enterprise B2B stuff. Right? We're not talking about video sharing apps or image sharing apps anymore. We're past that, which drove sort of early tech innovation. Now the market and the opportunities clearly are in the enterprise space.
Yeah, I would agree. Enterprises tend to sort of not be early adopters just because it's complicated, it's risky, and they want to make sure that the technology or the business model works. But when it does work and an enterprise gets wind of it and says this might work for us, that's where I think truly kind of industry-wide innovation can happen. Yep. So I want to take a pause real quick and I'm going to add a banner here and just say, for folks who want to ask questions, please jump in. Please ask some questions, share your comments or thoughts, whether it's about immigration tech or sort of the broader global mobility industry. Will be really interesting to hear what folks in the industry have to say about the technology, or maybe where it's missing, and maybe what we can do about it. So you've had this realization that, number one, there are clients who don't just want to go to a moving company and then another provider for something else and a third provider. They want to go to somebody for essentially all of their services. And then it sounds like you also had this consistent thought of, how do we make this better, more efficient? How do we leverage technology? So what was that sort of, if you remember, what was that moment where you decided, I'm going to do something about it? I'm going to build a platform. And how did you come to that moment?
Honestly, I've been nagging at me for years. It was actually really annoying because we couldn't do what we wanted to do in the companies that I worked for, because there wasn't much, again, available on the market. And I actually decided to start Relocation Online just, fairly recently after the then last recession that we faced, because I did this in 2011. So we were just barely out of it. So there was also at that time not a whole lot of appetite still for a lot of big investments. And so, those things combined with just having sort of done some of this before, right? Having had that tech experience and also now having pretty solid relocation experience, and the Dutch stubbornness that always is present, I just needed to do it myself. And I think I think one of the bigger things for me, and that's still true largely today, and that drives us today, is most tech still focuses on the folks delivering the services, not the recipients, right? So we're talking about the person moving, the assignee, transferee, whatever label you give to them. And I think our industry at large, when I say our industry, I'm talking, I guess, the broader aspect of relocation, which includes immigration, is still struggling with that, because, as it turns out, this is actually really complex, right? Relocation is complex because you're dealing with, two different countries, most likely, particularly if we're talking international relocation, right? And so it's not just you're doing one thing. You're not just shipping household goods for moving. No, you need to get rid of your home at origin. You need to prepare all kinds of things for that. You then need to understand how you actually, get your immigration papers taken care of so that you can actually move. Then there is finding a new place. There's taxes. There's a whole host of things. So by the time you add it all up, throughout the relocation, you're dealing with, I don't know, 8 to 10 different providers potentially. And our industry largely has promised this idea of a single point of contact that takes care of everything for you. It's unfortunately a false promise. It made sense, again, when we started in the 80s and 90s, because we had fax and phone, and yeah, you couldn't easily communicate with these partners in all these places. So having one person to call on was a good idea. Fast forward to 2020, technology can largely fulfill that role of communication and collaboration to bringing everybody together. But that's still not how our industry operates, because generally these multiple providers that are involved have their own communication mechanisms, be it email, if they're still using older communication tools. They might have their own app or their own platform. Well, it's not a pleasant experience from the transferee's perspective to have to then deal with all these things. So that still drives us a lot. We think we can do a lot more as an industry, and that goes for Relocation Online as well, in terms of broadening the scope of our offering, in terms of the aspects of the relocation that it manages, and continually putting that at the forefront and letting the providers deal with how they connect to that system, how they interact with the system, rather than the other way around. Because right now the burden is still squarely on the person moving to deal with all of this.
And I think this, this begs a question for me, and probably some people out there who might be listening or watching. For Relocation Online, is you help support the assignee, or the person who's the actual individual or their family who's moving. Are they the user of the platform? Is the company or the employer the user of the platform? Or is it sort of an ecosystem where everyone could be on it, and it sort of is a centralized place for the entire process?
Yeah, it's the latter now. It wasn't that early on when we started, but it is now. So it does bring all parties together so that they literally are in real time seeing where we're at with the relocation. And again, just drawing the contrast with the more traditional approach in sort of the systems and the software that exist, it's so back office focused that the communication still largely takes place in email. So that means everybody's happily sitting there, filing emails into a folder with the name of the transferee on it. And that's the place they go if they need to know what's happening with a relocation. So the first thing we did, and we made that choice luckily early on, is move the conversation out of email and onto the platform. So communication takes place on the platform. Not revolutionary in 2020 as a concept, but trust me, still most communication in our industry is largely email and endless PDF attachments. Yeah. And then if any of us as a provider, whether it's destination services or immigration, we know what we're doing, right? This is our daily routine. So for us, this feels natural. I come to the office, or now open up my laptop in my bedroom and I get to work. But the first thing you do is you go to Outlook. Okay, great. But if I'm the transferee, and I don't do this every year, right? I maybe move once or twice in my life internationally. We're putting a lot of burden on them to figure out how to deal with this barrage of communication from all these different parties. And so no wonder that they can't keep track of it. No wonder that they get annoyed that we ask them the same questions over and over again. And so, yeah, the whole purpose of the platform is to eliminate that frustration on part of the assignee, bring everybody together in one place, make sure that the information is shared, and then very relevant in today's world, that also brings a lot of data privacy, security, and compliance aspects with it, because email is a nightmare to track in terms of that aspect.
So how do all these platforms, or these, I guess, service providers, and as well as the assignee, how do they integrate with the platform? So if I'm I'm an immigration attorney, and then there's also like the tax provider, and then I suppose there's a broker that helps you find an apartment, and then there's the person who's actually moving. How do they all sort of integrate, or how do they all engage with Relocation Online?
Yeah, good question. So there are some limitations there in terms of how many external parties can engage. Also, not so much on limitations on the system, but more on the practical aspect, right? You typically are not going to get an agent to log into another system than their own. So that is a problem. So I think luckily for us, with the focus that we have now, our customers are the providers who are in charge of the service delivery. So they use the platform, they invite the transferee onto the platform as needed, the client contacts as well, and then they will behind the scenes communicate with the agent. So that means there is some communication still surely happening over email potentially. But it's no longer burdening the assignee, right? They're not just being copied on yet another message. No, they just know where to go to consume all this information. And then we're working hard with our customers, with other industry partners, all the way up and down the food chain, really in the relocation branch, to connect to their system. So obviously, the platform is API enabled. So APIs essentially allow two applications to exchange information with each other based on some common sort of agreement and rules around that data exchange. And I think that's, by the way, another, for those of you who've heard me talk about this before, this has been a subject that I've been, going from advocacy downright to begging over the last 5-6 years to get to get more of our industry API enabled and connected that way. We still have a long way to go. It's frankly holding us back as an industry to go faster on adopting technology better and improving this experience of the assignee. And bizarrely in our industry, that is, we're being held back on that. There is more emphasis on it now than ever, but we're still not going fast enough from our point of view.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. I talk about that a lot in terms of just adoption will require either a large company just buying everyone out, and it wouldn't be an API. It would just be a swallowing and an integration of a lot of different providers, or probably more reasonably is a lot of different people like yourself, like myself, like others, focus on really solving a problem well with technology. And we just talk to one another where it's reasonable, meaning our software or solutions can actually, sort of talk to one another and transfer that data. So I think it would be either one of those things, or frankly, I think it'll be a combination of both. Once that starts to mature, more people will have access to technology, and more technology will be feasible, quite frankly. From another question, that's kind of along the same lines, which is for me particularly important because I'm an immigration lawyer and, also running an immigration tech company. How do you handle immigration on your platform? And I ask that because, yes, there are always going to be very, very basic high level steps that you have to take. You have to always put in some basic documentation. Everyone's going to need a passport. Everyone's going to need, something else. There's always going to be the consular interview. There's always going to be sort of a visa that you're getting, but it does differ from country to country. How do you sort of handle that? How does Relocation Online both enable this location agnostic immigration process while also still keeping it sort of relevant to the user?
Yeah, good question. It's an interesting challenge, particularly given that actually as of earlier this week, we're now officially capable of supporting relocations in 107 countries. We're not quite there in delivering them in all 107, but we're working towards that with our customers. So we in preparation of what our customers are asking for, that's now possible. There's no way that we can become experts on all those 107, right? So to your point, we build a lot of the infrastructure to, basically handle the common process from communication and collaboration to document processing, to having a mechanism to create sort of an easy flow to follow me along through the major milestones in an immigration procedure, knowing that the details are country specific. So there's some back-end stuff that we do that makes it easy for us to say, okay, well, in this country, you need these types of documents. So with then the input from our customers, we identify those documents so that they become recognizable in the system and they can be requested, say, from the assignee. Mm-hmm. So it's a combination of our technology with the input of our customer as we then go into a new country to, with their help, learn a bit more, modify our system, and then there's a lot of content management tools that they have to really, not just build a system out for their country, but also, frankly, for their company. So there's a level of customization that they can do that makes sense for them. The way they speak about it internally, also the voice and the kind of the brand message that they use to communicate with them. Some are more playful, where others are more sort of professional in how they conduct and exchange information. The system allows them to do that. So we provide the high level at the global scale tools on our end to go a little deeper into the country, and then it's on to our customers to take it to the next level and customize it for their own purposes.
So basically, I guess the idea is that it's sort of a user generated almost knowledge base in terms of your immigration. I mean, to an extent, right? Where you provide the tools to them, and the users, based on their country and based on their local immigration sort of rules and practices, they can play around with the platform and or sort of provide you with the insights as to how it works. Is that sort of what I'm getting?
Yeah, they get the framework to deliver an immigration service, and we call these procedures. And like I said, the procedure sort of is broken down by major milestones, and then within each milestones, there are specific tasks that need to be completed. And each task, it has a communication element to it, a time and planning element to it, and then of course status: is this thing done, yes or no? And so, yeah, indeed, to your point, then with that framework in place, the experts in location will then give it the final sort of detail needed to make it relevant for them.
So I have a big question here, and I'm actually going to put this on the screen because I think, to me, it's just such an important one that I want to have it on there. What do you think is the future of global mobility tech? And this is, to me, a question that sort of touches on, you talked about the connection between different companies via APIs. We talked a little bit about immigration and how, it's both really flexible. Your platform, in a sense, is flexible because it allows folks to utilize it within their immigration regime. And then there's also this idea of global mobility is not just immigration. It's also the concept of relocating and finding having information coming from all different parts. I think you touched a little bit on the fact that we're not quite there yet with APIs. It's still something that we're working on quite aggressively. What do you think is the future? I mean, what do you envision? What do you envision maybe the next 3 to 5 years, which is very much something that you and I will be part of? But then there's also what do you envision in 20 years, where who knows if we're still in the game, but someone else might be. And what do you think that could possibly look like?
Yeah, in 20 years, I will definitely not be in the game. Well, who knows? But in all likelihood, I won't, because I'll be old then. Yeah, I mean, future, that's a loaded question, right? The future of global mobility tech. I think, I can just pick up on some themes. One I already touched on is way more emphasis on the experience of the person moving. And largely today, I think what we need to acknowledge is that we're talking about, at least from my perspective and the way we operate as a team in the industry, it's corporate relocation, right? So a company is doing relocation, has decided that they want to compensate and provide services to their employees to do this, and they outsource that largely to then service providers to help them with that. That's the bulk of the business that we're dealing with. I think that part is actually changing. It was already changing, but I think this pandemic is going to further change that. We just don't know quite yet how, but it's pretty clear that the idea of where you are working and what a work environment looks like and where you will be doing that is going to change. And that means that there will be more people that are, sort of self-determining where they're going to be moving. Which brings all kinds of interesting challenges with it, and that companies are already beginning to grapple with, and because we're on this forced experiment of remote work, right? And so we're getting used to this now. And it's like, okay, well, Do I want to do this in my little bonus room or looking at the suburbs here? Or do I want to do this in a more interesting place? Perhaps if I'm doing it anyway, then maybe I want to pick a place that is more interesting than that. And I think people are going to make that assessment. So a percentage of the future talent mobility will be self-initiated. There was a trend in that happening in our industry already with the increase in lump sum. So people that are basically opting to take a wad of cash and figure out their own move. And our industry has always struggled with that segment of the industry because we haven't been able to make money off of them. Because the moment you give me a wad of cash, I'm not going to part with it. So, so all those things mean that there's going to be a segmentation of the market where there will be corporate mobility that will no doubt be a significant portion of our business. That needs to change in that we need to focus on that experience of the person moving. We need absolutely all the interoperability between systems that we can so that the data starts flowing freely. That will allow us to innovate more and get more creative with how we communicate, collaborate, share information. And that in itself can then probably translate over to that other segment as well, because now we've built the stuff that we need that is more tech-enabled, more digital, to then make it affordable to go after that lump sum group. Or the self-initiated moves, whatever you want to call them. I'm not a fan of the lump sum label. It's like I don't want to be called a file eater.
Right.
So what that looks like is yet to be determined. There's all kinds of attempts being made by some incumbents in our industry, some new ones that are experimenting with this. But I think the verdict is still out as to what the winning formula is for that, and that's fascinating and interesting. And our team is constantly asking this question that you just put on the screen internally as we think about our product development roadmap and what's next for us.
Yeah, I think that's a question that I'm really interested in as well. I also wonder where artificial intelligence will come into play, where there might be suggestions as to where someone can go. There might be you might click OK and it'll set off a chain reaction of events that the platform or a platform can handle that a person doesn't have to handle anymore, or they could just be there to hold hands with and guide the assignee rather than send them documents and send them checklists and make sure that they did this and make sure that they did that. You touched on something just now where your team talks about this. Where do you see, from what you can share, where do you see Relocation Online growing, I guess, over the next handful of years? I mean, I guess with APIs, part of that will be we're all pushing more companies to open up their platforms to integration via APIs. But, on top of that, sort of where do you see Relocation Online going in the near future, both given coronavirus and the fact that this has really halted, travel a bit, but also on the flip side, it's now creating, like you said, this normalization of working from home, which once we can travel again, it might blow up the travel industry in a good way, where everyone wants to now all of a sudden work all over the world. Yeah.
So what I can share in terms of what our product roadmap looks like and sort of the more immediate future is, this was ongoing anyway. Some things have been expedited because of the pandemic, obviously, are basically better virtual support tools for managing and delivering the relocation service. Like we literally have new clients that started this year, albeit with very limited volume, but they became new customers because they were actually working in an office environment as a provider. And that meant there was a whole lot of interaction within the office. And now all of a sudden they needed to work remote and they don't have that personal connection. So now they need a system to figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. And we begin to solve that for them in a nice way because we follow the service delivery as it happens. And therefore everybody that has access to that platform can see exactly what's going on. So we'll double down on those types of efforts to support our existing customers and the market that we were already pursuing. Then we're definitely going broader into the different aspects of relocation to deliver on that promise that our industry has continually made is you only have one place to go and a single point of contact. And so actually the way we've been rebranding this or beginning to talk about this in our industry, this was literally the term that was being used, the SPOC model, single point of contact. That then became single point of coordination, because we had to admit that actually, you're not going to just be talking to one person. The mover is going to show up at your house. You're going to deal with the destination consultant, with the immigration attorney. So we'll coordinate it on your behalf. So the way we're talking about it now is the single platform of communication. So SPOC 3.0. So that's sort of the grand vision, if you will, as to where this goes. And then with the connection and interoperability to other systems, whether they'll be HRS systems or the systems from the relocation management companies or the moving companies, doesn't matter. It all needs to connect together to be meaningful. And that could even be competitive platforms, by the way, right? We're there's going to be other solutions out there. There are other solutions out there, and I think we all need to figure out a way to play nice together. And that's sort of unique about our industry anyway, because in a way we compete with each other, but in another way we're also actually collaborating, because we're often being brought together by other parties to serve the needs of a company or the employee that's moving. Yeah,
and I found that the company doesn't really care if you're if you're sort of co-counseling with somebody who might be considered your competitor. They don't care. They just know that you're good at this, they're good at that. I want you two to work it out and deliver the service to me. And so, to your point, it's kind of, but generally speaking, I found it, I was actually writing about this earlier today, in the immigration and I think broader relocation industry, for the most part, everyone is just so incredibly nice and open and like willing to work together, even if there are competing sort of, desires from the business perspective.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something really important that we shouldn't forget. And the reason why I hardly ever talk about AI or machine learning or any of that stuff is the support on the ground. Like, as much as I'm for tech, right? But I've also lived it. I've been a destination service consultant for a DSP, helping families get relocated. I went through my own relocation, right? Self-managed, by the way, a little before this became a popular thing, but that was out of necessity because we were cheap and Dutch and all that stuff. We cannot forget that this is indeed very much a people business, where that human factor will remain incredibly important. And that's not trying to be traditionalist or anything. It's just a reality of the complexity of relocation. You cannot stick everything into an algorithm or some sort of a workflow, because there are simply too many variables in real life relocation that you can't anticipate. So, you also, by the way, need all that API interactivity to make real use of things like AI and machine learning. So it's nice that our industry talks about it, but we have a long way to go to really capitalize on that. But I think, to me, the way we've always positioned ourselves with our platform, the tech itself is not the end. It's a means to an end. It's a support to the people who are delivering the service, and we should never forget that. And that might change over time as we get further along in the future. But it's not gone as fast as people have been, either wanting to or have been talking about it in general, or what all the interesting articles with all the tech jargon make you believe is the case, because of like I said, because of the complexities that sort of are inherent to our industry and particularly in international relocation.
Do you think, you touched on something also interesting there, which is that you've had clients come on this year who were previously doing this manually, and to some extent they needed you because of the quarantine and the pandemic. We've seen something similar on our end too, where we had clients come on board who beforehand were interested, but it wasn't the right time, and they're going back and forth. And now all of a sudden they just can't come into the office and do the thing they needed to do, right. and they need a technologically enabled solution for this. Do you think that overall, whether it's just for Relocation Online or perhaps for the broader industry, do you think that COVID will come out as a net positive, or do you think it's sort of because of the lack of travel right now, it might be a net negative, let's say in the near term?
Yeah, it's definitely a net positive for the digital transformation of our industry. That has been put on steroids. right? So the impacts are there. And then that's true, by the way, across the board. And you can see it. The tech companies are the ones that are doing well right now. And there's a reason for it, because we're all doing this, live streaming and communicating in, virtually. So in that sense, I think in that positive, because that will result into better experiences, more efficiency, et cetera, and better ability to adopt new innovations in our industry. There's definitely a net negative in terms of what it means for our revenues and our volumes, right? Because the volumes are down. There are whole segments of industries that have been decimated and won't be picking up for years to come in all likelihood. And we're a transactional business. In fact, for the first time ever in our career, we've been able to say we have pandemic-proof pricing, because we charge when our clients use the platform as there is a relocation. There's no sort of ongoing fees, which makes it actually really easy for our clients to sign up, right? Because there's no cost commitment and nobody wants to spend money right now. So, which is, I think, helping us to still win some business. But yeah, that's a big question. And again, I see lofty predictions and happy talk all over the place. I don't have a crystal ball on that. I think that's the hardest part for us, actually, is making decisions without exactly knowing what this looks like in 6, 12, 18 months from now. Much beyond that, I can't look anyway. And I've learned in tech that that's pretty useless, because things go so quick. We've ripped out whole technology frameworks in those periods of times because something better was on the market. So, when you earlier said 20 years, I'm seeing myself retired somewhere, hopefully. Although this has reset the clock a little bit, I will admit.
Yeah, I feel like I've talked to and I've heard of so many people who say that they feel like they're launching their business all over again. Like they feel like they're in the beginnings of it, not just because of the size of business. In some cases they're growing, but just from the perspective of everything is so new, and you're almost like you think like a startup in the sense of you're marketing in totally new ways. You're trying different things. You're doing virtual sessions. You're providing a totally new pricing strategy based on the fact that you just want to be conscious of what's happening right now. But that kind of mentality and that kind of like quick decision making is something that disappears, I think, over time as a company matures, because you then have your processes, pricing models, et cetera, set in stone. So it's kind of cool to hear, to hear founders, I suppose, just say like, man, it feels like I'm starting over, but I have all of this knowledge now in my head. In that sense, it's kind of fun from the business perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited. I mean, honestly, our entire team, we've never worked as hard as we have these last 6 months, with a lot of uncertainty in your space and reduced revenues and all that, right? So and again, our entire industry is facing these challenges. But it's to your point, it's also an exciting time, because we get to look at things again with a fresh perspective and think about what's next. How do we reinvent this thing once again? And that's part of our, a good company that does this, what we do, or and for your own survival, has to make that part of your your day-to-day operational attitude, is that there is no status quo. You're never done. You have to continually evolve. And in fact, I was talking to our team earlier on our daily stand-up, and I saw that we have nearly done 1,000 code commits already the year to date. Now, this is somewhat reflective of the team size, but that's pretty significant. Like the old days where you would get, version 3.8 would be released. No, we're literally, almost 1,000 year to date means 5 times a day we're spinning new code to the system that goes out through a live deploy, meaning it's live for our clients without ever taking the system down. So that shows you what this, this continual innovative process looks like, because it's never ending. It's built into our software development life cycle, and therefore our attitude towards continuous improvement.
Yeah, that's so cool. And for folks who are listening who might not be technologically sort of in the tech space, it's a lot of these changes also happen without the user knowing. It's back end changes. It's all sorts of stuff. But yeah, but it also reflects the idea that there's a lot happening, and there's resource allocation for whether it's retooling, like some people say, even internally for a technology company. Is it retooling? Are you, taking on a new sort of platform or new edition, or maybe you're finally upgrading your servers to something you wanted to, because maybe now you have a little bit of downtime, or there's so many different things happening right now. That's so cool to hear. One of the last questions, sort of to wrap up here. I'm curious from your perspective, again, maybe going back to the immigration piece a little bit. Do you think there's opportunity for immigration platforms, the ones that might be country specific, right? Whether they're really handling the case, the visa process, or something else with regards to a particular country's immigration laws. Do you think there's opportunity for those companies to connect to or somehow integrate with the broader sort of relocation tech space? Or I don't know, how would you envision that?
Yeah, that is actually a question that we constantly ask ourselves, because I think our industry is on this collision course of technologies that are all coming together across all these different disciplines. So you have each of these verticals within relocation building their own purpose-built solution, because that makes sense, or they're either renting it or they're building it, right, depending on what their background is and where they come from. But that fundamentally causes then the problem and the friction for the person moving. If they have to handle all these steps, is like, well, how many apps am I going to have to log into to complete my relocation? Yep. So yeah, I think again that sort of speaks to the opportunity that exists for our industry to do this better. And I would definitely encourage anybody with an immigration tech platform to start broadening the horizon. And that might mean that your tech platform that you use is what you work in, that is your environment, but it might not necessarily be the environment that the person moving is working in. So yeah, advice to anybody in tech and immigration. And currently, this is for anybody in tech. It's a no-brainer. But yeah, make sure your tool is API enabled, and not just for data exchange, but take even a better and a broader view that you allow others to build on top of what you have. That's where things get you have opportunities to improve this assignee experience.
Yeah, and I know just coming from the immigration tech side of things, there is a bit bigger push and a bigger emphasis to have a sort of client portal, or in this case, to use the terminology, an assignee portal. But to your point, it's usually built on top of a platform that has been fundamentally for the back end, for the service providers, and hasn't really been, or at least wasn't in the beginning, meant for perhaps the ultimate human being who's moving. So there's absolutely a push. I mean, this has been a talk of the immigration tech or the immigration bar for years, at least here in the US, that immigration technology solutions, particularly those that support lawyers, are more so building out sort of a user interface or user experience for the individual. They don't need to see everything the lawyer needs to see. They need to know what's pertinent to them. Yep. They need to be able to upload documents or get documents back. And they just need a quick view of something as they are sort of going through the moving process. Because we forget, to your point, we're the ones in service providers going into our office and sitting, and maybe coordinating things. The individual is like moving, they're packing, they're saying goodbye to their relatives, they're figuring, like their life is crazy at the moment. And so how can we make their life easier through technology, Yeah,
no, I think that's the key question there. And so in that sense, there's a lot of opportunities still available, which is exciting. And we can, and it doesn't have to be complex, by the way. I mean, if you have a case management system, can you make it hook into Slack, right? Maybe that becomes the way to communicate with the person who's moving. So there are ways to utilize current technology as well. We're going down that path, in fact, where ultimately what we want our users to do, and when I say users, I mean our customers, is to sort of integrate with whatever platform they want. And just, like you can do today, for those of you who've ever set up a Slack channel and you're linking it to something else, or you're familiar with some of the API-powered solutions that are out there, whether it's If This Then That or Zapier or the likes. Authenticate between two systems. Give you a practical example. We're doing an integration right now between our platform and QuickBooks. And ultimately, that means that there will be a button that somebody on the account can click. It says, connect to my QuickBooks account. And all you do is you authenticate, and now the two are connected. That's how simple this should be. If I contrast that to the conversations that I've been having with some of our peers in the industry about API integrations, we're taking months or years to get this done. That's insane. That has to stop. It has to be as simple as I just described. You want to connect to, here's a list of systems that you can connect with, and you have to either obtain a key and a token or some sort of security asset, or better yet, you just log in and that's it.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on this is that it also does need some kind of a common language and a common almost data architecture, so that if we do all open up our APIs to one another, we need to be utilizing the same terminology when our platforms speak to each other in order to kind of really streamline it.
Yeah, although that will elude us forever, by the way. I think that in fact, that is probably one of the things that keeps us from getting there, because you're absolutely right. Those conversations are happening throughout the industry, where there's like, well, we first need to agree on a standard. Before you can get an industry like this to agree on a standard, forget about it. I mean, you're years away. So the API actually has solved that. You don't need to agree on a standard. Just let the developers figure out how to connect these systems, and then put a simple interface in the front end for the consumer of the system. Then there's some maintenance that needs to happen, and hopefully you don't start messing about with your API in the back end. You need to be able to support that, but that complexity can largely be hidden because the API has become the standard, if you will.
That's a great point. Yeah, and hopefully I'm seeing it happen more and more, and I know that there's hopefully some news coming out shortly with some other immigration tech platforms with regards to APIs. So I hope that this is where the industry continues to go, so that both you and I and others can just sort of work on what we need to work on, and know that as we deploy new solutions and new additions that help our clients, we know that we can easily connect with the rest of the industry. We don't have to first deploy it and then go fight for it in terms of the industry.
Right.
So this has been such a great conversation, and to me, again, it's so interesting to hear about the broader piece, because I focus so much on immigration specifically that I forget that there's so much more to it. I think you and I can talk about this probably for another hour. I'm curious, as one last question, what's something that you think that you want to share in terms of maybe your journey with Relocation Online, and where you think that what you want people to know about you and the company, I guess, especially given where we're at now with the industry?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. So the ones who joined in early on hopefully got a sense of sort of our attitudes toward continuous improvement, recognizing that even though we've been doing this for 9 years, our team has daily conversations about how to make this better, and we're pretty excited about what's possible in the future, notwithstanding, of course, the sort of intermittent challenges that we're all facing due to COVID. But in any case, it's an exciting time still to be in virtual relocation support solutions, because they've become that much more relevant within, it happened over a couple of weeks, literally earlier this year. So still early days for us, lots to learn and to do, but we're keep plugging away.
And so my last final question, which is a fun one. You mentioned that you came to the US, you wanted to be here for maybe 2 to 3 years, and then, as you said, life happened, as it does, and you're now here 20 plus years later. Where do you think you would have moved if you had only been in Seattle for 2 to 3 years? What would have been your dream destination?
Well, that has become a lot more relative, also as I've grown a little older. But the idea was, maybe San Francisco, New York. There were other places in the United States that my wife and I thought we would explore. I think we're taking a slightly longer term view now, and probably will end up back in Europe at some point in the future. When that is, I don't know. I've learned at least to stop making predictions about those types of things. But that's part of, I think, also, by the way, why I'm still pretty bullish on relocation, right? This idea that we're all going to be working from our home office, I can't wait to get on a plane and go somewhere and experience another culture. And in our case, that will likely mean moving to another country and starting that process anew, which is exciting.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel the same way. I'm itching to get out. I love working from home, but I'm also itching to get out.
Yeah.
Well, Ronald, thank you so much. I mean, this was really great, and I've learned a lot. It's given me a lot to think about. I hope this was interesting for our listeners and our viewers. So thank you. Really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for coming on.
No, likewise. You've got a great show and a good following and a nice audience, including on the GMI Rocket group. So pleasure participating. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks everybody for joining. This was the conclusion of episode 9. Again, crazy to me that it's episode 9, but so much more to come. Stay tuned for next week, and same time, same place, 4 p.m. Eastern, we'll be live. So thank you all so much for joining, and have a really great rest of your day.